We come together not to add something to our lives, nor to gather more ideas with which to improve the human scene, but to rest a moment in the awareness that there is a presence here, a presence that has been with us from the beginning. If there is any purpose in our being together, it is to remember that the harmony we seek cannot be established by human effort, and the peace we long for cannot be secured by personal striving. For centuries, the world has labored under the belief that through enough thought, enough planning, enough force of will, life can be reshaped into something whole. Yet each attempt, no matter how sincere, leads only to further restlessness, because that which is born of human effort must be maintained by human effort, and therefore never brings freedom. As we sit here, let us acknowledge honestly that every one of us has tried, at some time, to repair our lives through our own strength. We have tried to change people, to adjust circumstances, to rid ourselves of fear, to pray for conditions to be altered, and yet, if we look carefully, we discover that no matter how much repairing we have done, the root of our unrest remains untouched. We have been working in the realm of effects, where nothing real can be changed, because effects have no life of their own. They are but shadows of belief. The infinite way reveals a simple but revolutionary truth. The moment we attempt to fix anything, we have already accepted the problem as power. The moment we begin to struggle, we have already admitted that there is something apart from God that must be corrected. And so the spiritual path begins not with effort, but with release. It begins with the recognition that God alone is the life, the law, the substance, and the activity of our being. There is no other power at work. Let us then enter this hour with a new willingness not to change the outer picture, but to rest inwardly in that quiet assurance that the presence which formed us, maintains us, and lives us is here, functioning as our very being. We are not here to try harder. We are here to yield. And as we yield, something begins to stir within, a peace that needs no argument, a confidence that needs no support, a stillness that reveals itself as the only reality. And so we begin knowing that whatever unfolds in this time together will not come through the mind that strives, but through the spirit that lives itself. As we go on with this work, it becomes increasingly clear that the human mind, by its very nature, cannot touch the realm of spirit. It is not because the mind is bad, nor because it is unworthy, but because the mind functions only within the field of effects, and spirit operates at the level of cause. When we attempt to fix, correct, or improve the outer picture, we are unknowingly trying to manipulate the shadows while remaining unaware of the light from which they arise. And so no matter how diligent the effort, no matter how intense the desire, our attempts to rearrange the shadows leave us exhausted, for we have never touched the source. You may notice that the more you struggle with a problem, be it a physical condition, a financial concern, a relationship difficulty, the more substantial it seems to become. Why is that? It is because the moment you attempt to correct a condition, you have given it reality. You have granted it a power of its own. You've acknowledged it as something apart from God that must be subdued or conquered. And in that very act, you have moved out of spiritual awareness into the belief of two powers, a good power that you seek and an evil power that threatens. Now consider for a moment what happens when we operate from that duality. The mind becomes tense, anxious, creative in its fears. It begins to speculate, to judge, to analyze, to project. All of this activity is but a sign that we have accepted the appearance as true and are now working with it on its own level. But truth is never found on the level of appearances. Truth is found only when we retire from the battle and return to the realization that God is the only presence and the only power functioning anywhere. Human fixing always fails because it begins with a false premise. It begins with the belief that something has gone wrong in creation. It begins with the assumption that our task is to repair the handiwork of God or to add something to the completeness of divine being. But the spiritual reality is that nothing God has created can be improved, and nothing unlike God has ever been formed. The entire structure of fixing rests upon illusion, and so, in this work, we are asked to lay down the tools of the human mind not because they are sinful, but because they are useless in the realm of spirit. We do not reach God through thinking, planning, pleading, or even through our most earnest desires. We reach God when thought becomes still, when effort is surrendered, when we recognize that the divine activity is already present and needs no assistance from us. This is not an easy realization, because the mind has been trained through centuries to believe that its task is to solve, to manage, to correct, to protect. But as long as we are engaged in the work of fixing, we are closing our ears to that still, small voice which whispers, "Be still and know that I am God." Not be clever, not be strong, not be determined, but simply be still. In stillness, the false sense of a problem dissolves, not because we have conquered it, but because we have ceased granting it reality. As we continue deeper, we must remember this. Anything we try to fix, we first affirm as real. Anything we release into God's presence, we allow to dissolve as illusion. Let this sink gently into your consciousness, for upon this foundation the entire spiritual life rests. As we go forward together, let us remember that all spiritual progress rests upon a single shift, turning away from the world of effects and returning to the realization of cause. Nearly the whole of human living is spent in the realm of effects, looking at bodies, finances, relationships, politics, emotions, and trying to improve them. Yet none of these have ever been self-created. They are the outpicturings, the shadows of a deeper state of consciousness. And so long as we give our attention to the shadows, we cannot see the light from which they arise. This is why the world exhausts itself with endless attempts to fix, correct, and reform outer conditions. It has never understood that the outer is but the product, never the producer. And so the first step in spiritual awakening is to acknowledge quietly and sincerely, I will no longer accept effects as cause. I will no longer grant power to that which is merely appearance. This is not a statement to convince the mind. It is a recognition that dawns as one sees that what the senses report is never the whole story. There is only one cause, and that cause is God. God is the only law, the only substance, the only activity, the only power. When we hold this in awareness, not as a mantra, not as an affirmation, but as a realized truth, then we begin to perceive the nature of the world differently. We no longer approach a problem with the assumption that something outside is acting of its own accord. Instead, we recognize that everything appearing in our experience is but the picture taken of our consciousness. It has no life, no will, no substance apart from the consciousness beholding it. And so the inner work becomes very simple, turning away from the picture and resting in the source. We do not deny appearances. That would be foolish. We do not fear them. That would give them power. We simply refuse to work with them, refuse to grant them causation, for appearances are not cause. They have never been cause. They can neither bless nor harm. They have only the life we unconsciously lend them. The moment we realize this, even faintly, a shift takes place within. A certain peace begins to replace agitation. Fear loosens its grip, not because the problem is solved, but because we have ceased treating the problem as a power. And in that moment, the presence of God begins to be felt not as an idea, but as a living, active reality quietly asserting itself. This is the beginning of true healing. Healing never takes place in the outer world. Healing is the restoration of our awareness of the one cause. And as this awareness deepens, the effects naturally reform according to the nature of their source. Harmony appears because harmony is inherent in God. Supply appears because supply is inherent in God. Peace appears because peace is inherent in God. Do not look to the outer for change. Rest in the inner, and the outer will follow. Turn from effect to cause, and you will find that the problems which once seemed so formidable lose their substance, for they never had any reality except the one we assigned them. It is in this turning that we begin to live spiritually. It is in this turning that we step out of duality and rest in the realization of one presence. And it is in this turning that the whole structure of fear begins to dissolve. As we continue, let us come gently into the realization that the entire secret of spiritual living lies in a rest that is not of the body and not of the mind. It is the rest that comes when the personal self ceases its labor, when the mind becomes still of its own volition, and when the heart no longer reaches outward for help, but inward for recognition. This rest is not something we create, it is something we permit. The world has always assumed that answers come through struggle, through mental concentration, through effort of some kind. Yet every mystic who has touched the realm of spirit has discovered the opposite, that the presence becomes known not in striving, but in silence. When the mind stops trying to solve, when the emotions stop trying to influence, when the will stops trying to achieve, a great unveiling occurs. Grace, which has always been present, flows of its own accord. You see, God does not respond to our effort. God does not respond to our words, our pleading, or our persuasion. God is not something to be moved. God is infinite activity already in motion. It is only the mind's restlessness that hides that activity from our awareness. When the mind is busy, anxiously projecting, planning, resisting, hoping the movement of spirit is obscured, not because God withholds itself, but because the noise of our own thoughts fills the space where God would be heard. True prayer, as we understand it in this work, is not the utterance of words. It is not asking for anything. It is not even the mental contemplation of spiritual ideas. True prayer is quiet listening. True prayer is the inner stillness in which the divine presence announces itself. When Scripture says, "In quietness and confidence shall be your strength," it states a spiritual law. When it says, "Be still and know that I am God," it gives the precise method of spiritual realization. And when Jesus said, "I can of mine own self do nothing," he revealed the secret of his healing ministry. The personal self must be silent so that the divine life may act. Rest, then, is not a passive surrender. It is the active recognition that God is already doing the work. It is the relinquishing of the belief that we must guide, control, manage, or manipulate anything within or without. It is the awareness that all spiritual power is present here and now, requiring only our stillness for its activity to be revealed. When we enter this rest, something extraordinary begins to happen. Problems lose their urgency. Fear loses its authority. The need to find answers diminishes. And a quiet assurance emerges, not because we have solved anything, but because we have touched the realm in which nothing needs solving. This is the rest that allows grace to flow. Let us understand clearly. Grace is not something that begins when we become still. Grace is the eternal functioning of God. Stillness simply removes the interference. The moment our striving stops, the divine rhythm becomes evident. The moment thought quiets, harmony rises to the surface. The moment desire ceases, fulfillment becomes visible. Rest does not create spiritual good, it reveals it. And so, in this work, we learn to be still, not as a technique, but as a recognition. We are still because we know that the Father within is doing the work. We rest because we trust that the invisible activity of spirit is ever present, ever operative, and ever complete. In this sacred rest, life begins to unfold from the center outward, not by our effort, but by God's grace. Now let us come to a point that is often taken outwardly and therefore misunderstood. This matter of doing nothing. When we say in spiritual work that you are to do nothing, many immediately assume that this is a call to neglect the responsibilities of human living or to become indifferent to the conditions that arise in daily experience. But that is never what is meant. The infinite way is not a path of avoiding life. It is a path of seeing life correctly. To do nothing means only one thing. Do not attempt to use the human mind as the instrument of God. Do not attempt to change conditions through thought, emotion, or willpower. Do not try to push truth into a situation. Do not attempt to bring God to where God already is. When we say do nothing, we are speaking of the inner life, not the outer. Outwardly, you may continue your work, care for your family, tend to your duties, but inwardly, there must be a profound surrender, a refusal to use the mind as a tool of spiritual manipulation. The moment you begin to think that you can direct spiritual power, you have stepped into illusion. The moment you try to make truth accomplish something, you have left truth behind. Doing nothing is the cessation of mental activity that believes it knows what the condition is, what caused it, or how it should be corrected. It is the refusal to engage the mind in spiritual work. For the mind is never the instrument of spirit. The mind is the receiver of appearances. Spirit is the reality behind them. When you face a problem, whether of health, supply, or relationship, the human instinct is to grasp it mentally, to analyze it, to treat it, to declare truth at it, or to attempt to change it through spiritual statements. But in this work, you must see that such efforts only bind you more tightly to the appearance. They keep you on the level of the problem, where no solution can ever be found. To do nothing means that when a discordant condition presents itself, you do not take it into your thought, you do not seek to correct it, you do not resist it. You simply acknowledge within yourself, I can of mine own self do nothing. The Father within me doeth the work. And then you rest in that inner assurance until the sense of a problem dissolves. This is not passivity. It is the most powerful activity there is. Letting God be God. Letting the divine presence reveal itself. Letting the spiritual law of harmony unfold without interference from the personal sense of I. You may find that the mind rebels against this. The intellect wants to contribute something. It wants to help. It wants to participate. But every attempt of the personal mind to help is an obstruction. It is a belief in a self apart from God. It is a belief that something must be done to bring about harmony, rather than recognizing that harmony is the very nature of the presence already here. When you do nothing, You are simply stepping aside to allow the one power to function. You are withdrawing the false sense of self that thinks it can accomplish spiritual work. Spiritual work is always God's work. It is the activity of the one infinite consciousness expressing itself. As you learn this principle, not intellectually, but through experience, you will discover a strange and beautiful truth. Harmony appears not because you solved a problem, but because the sense of a problem disappeared. It dissolved as the mist dissolves before the morning sun, without your effort, without your thought, without your intervention. In doing nothing, you have created the inner atmosphere through which God's grace becomes visible. And that grace, needing no help from you, fulfills itself perfectly. Let us now consider more deeply this appearance world which so captivates the human mind. Everything that comes to us through the senses, what we see, hear, taste, touch, and smell, is only the surface of experience. It is never the reality. It is merely the outpicturing of a universal belief accepted as fact. And because humanity has lived for so long with faith in what the senses report, it has given tremendous power to shadows which, in truth, have none. When a condition presents itself, be it sickness, lack, conflict, or fear, the immediate tendency is to assume that the condition is self-existent, that it has a law behind it, a cause within it, or a power inherent in it. Yet, the foundational teaching of spiritual life is this: all appearances are effects, and effects have no power. They are not self-sustained or self-governed. They have no authority of their own. A physical disease seems powerful only because we give it power. Lack seems threatening only because we invest it with law. Fear seems real only because consciousness accepts the appearance as something capable of acting upon us. But in truth, there is only one presence, one activity, and one power, and that is God. Anything unlike the nature of God, regardless of how formidable it appears, has no law to sustain it. Let us not misunderstand. The appearance world is not to be despised or denied. It is simply to be seen for what it is, the externalization of belief, not the revelation of truth. When you no longer grant power to appearances, you are not saying they do not show themselves. You are merely withdrawing the belief that they can affect the life of God, which constitutes your being. The world of appearances is always changing, sometimes harmonious, sometimes discordant, but the spirit that animates all existence remains unchanged. The mistake is when we try to work on the appearances themselves, hoping to reshape the shadows while ignoring the light. The shadows do not change by our effort. They change only when the light is recognized. Consider how sickness appears. It may arise suddenly or gradually, but in every case, it is an appearance without spiritual law. God is life. God is wholeness. God is perfection. There is no law of disease in God. Therefore, disease cannot have real power. It can only seem to have power through belief. And when belief is withdrawn, the appearance loses its seeming strength. The same is true of lack. There is no lack in God. God is infinite abundance, infinite provision, infinite supply. Whenever lack appears, it has no origin in spirit, no creative cause behind it. It is a shadow, nothing more. And the moment we cease treating it as a force, it evaporates in the presence of spiritual realization. Even human conflict, fear, anger, misunderstanding, these too are appearances without divine backing. They are the result of the belief that individuals are separate from one another, separate from God, and therefore subject to opposing forces. when the truth of one life, one self, one being is realized. The appearance of conflict loses its foundation. When you withdraw your fear of appearances, you remove the only support they ever had. You will find that they begin to dissolve, not always instantly, but inevitably, because they were never entities or powers. They were only the pictures formed by belief. This is why spiritual work never involves correcting people, conditions, or events. It involves only the recognition of the one presence. As that recognition dawns, the entire appearance world rearranges itself according to the nature of its source. The world of appearances has no power. God alone is power. And as you abide in this realization, you will begin to see harmony where discord once appeared, abundance where lack once frightened you, and peace where fear had taken root. Not because you changed the outer picture, but because you ceased believing in the power of the shadow and rested in the truth of the light. As we move deeper into this work, let us pause for a moment and contemplate the meaning of one presence. For the entirety of our spiritual realization depends on this simple truth. There is not a presence of good and a presence of evil. There is not a presence of health and a presence of disease. There is not a presence of abundance and a presence of lack. There is one presence only, God, infinite, indivisible, whole. And the degree to which this is felt, not merely understood, determines the measure of harmony that appears in our daily experience. Resting in one presence means that we relinquish the belief that anything else operates. It means we no longer look out at the world as though it contains powers that can act upon us. It means that we are not disturbed by appearances, for we know that the appearance has no authority. As long as we are reactive, as long as fear rises up, as long as we feel the need to resist or defend, we have not yet recognized one presence. But the moment we begin to feel within ourselves that God is the only presence here, something subtle and profound begins to happen. You will notice a softening of the mind. The tension of personal responsibility begins to loosen. The sense of needing to accomplish or secure anything starts to fade. And into that quietness, grace enters not as a dramatic event, but as a gentle assurance. Grace needs no fanfare. It is the effortless, natural activity of the divine, presence appearing as harmony. Resting in one presence does not mean forcing the mind to believe something. It is not an attempt to override fear with positive thought. Rather, it is the simple, quiet recognition that wherever I stand, God is. Whatever condition faces me, God is. Whatever the appearance seems to be, God is. This recognition lifts us out of the realm of appearances and establishes us in the truth of being. In this resting, you will find that fear has nothing to hold on to. Fear exists only when we believe there is a second presence, a presence of danger, of limitation, of absence. When those false beliefs dissolve, fear dissolves with them. One presence leaves no room for fear, because there is nothing left to oppose, nothing left to resist, nothing left to defend. As this awareness grows, something beautiful unfolds. The boundary between you and God begins to disappear. You no longer feel yourself seeking God, reaching for God, or waiting for God. You begin to sense that God is the very life of you, the very breath of you, the very consciousness of you. God becomes not an external helper, but the inner activity of your being. This is the moment when grace begins, not because God has suddenly appeared, but because you have ceased clinging to a false sense of self. Grace has always been functioning, but the noise of personal striving drowned it out. When that noise subsides, the presence makes itself known, not as a thought, not as a feeling, but as a quiet certainty that all is well, all is sustained, all is fulfilled. And so, resting in one presence is the doorway to spiritual living. It is the foundation of healing. It is the essence of peace. When you rest in this awareness, you will find that harmony appears not because you have changed conditions, but because you have recognized the one behind all conditions. And in that recognition, the appearance world aligns itself with the truth of the presence that governs all. This is the true beginning of grace. It is the moment when God becomes more real to you than the appearance, when the invisible becomes more substantial than the visible, when the inner assurance becomes the law of your being. And from this resting place, life unfolds naturally, without strain, without fear, without the endless search for solutions, because you have discovered the one presence that is the solution to everything. As we proceed, it becomes essential to understand how harmony appears in our experience. Harmony does not come because we have corrected something in the outer world. It does not arise because we have applied truth to a condition. It does not unfold because we have said the right words, held the right thoughts, or practiced the right method. Harmony appears for one reason only, because the invisible, the presence of God, has been realized within. The visible world is not a world of causes. It is a world of effects. It is the picture formed by the state of our consciousness in the moment. And so, when you look upon your experience and see harmony, it is not because something has been fixed out there. It is because something has been revealed within. Likewise, when discord appears, we are not seeing a power in the condition. We are seeing a momentary absence of spiritual awareness. Now, let us be very clear. The invisible is always present. God is always present. The kingdom of God is always functioning. What we call demonstration is merely the point at which this invisible activity becomes visible to us. But the activity itself never begins, it never changes, it never increases or decreases. It is eternally complete. The mistake we often make is to attempt to change the visible world. But the visible does not change by manipulation. It changes by revelation. When your consciousness recognizes the presence of God as the only power, the only substance, the only reality, then the outer picture aligns itself with that realization. It cannot do otherwise, because it has no life of its own. It is only the image cast by the light of your awareness. You will notice that harmony often appears quietly, without fanfare. A problem that seemed large simply recedes. A condition that frightened you loses its sense of power. A need is met without struggle. These changes do not occur because you have solved anything, but because your inner state has shifted. The appearance always responds to the nature of the cause behind it. This is why Jesus said, "Judge not according to the appearance." He was not speaking about moral judgment. He was speaking about perception. He was instructing us never to accept the visible seen as truth, because the visible is transient. The invisible is eternal. And so, when you rest in the awareness of one presence, when the mind grows still and the heart becomes receptive, the invisible harmony begins to outpicture itself. You will find that whatever needs to take form, whether in the body, in relationships, in supply, or in activity, appears without struggle. The form is not something you create. It is something you witness. In the same way that a seed placed in the earth unfolds without your assistance, so does spiritual realization unfold into visible expression. You do not open the petals of the flower, you behold them. You do not command the tide, You watch it come and go, and you do not force harmony. You witness it as the natural appearing of the invisible. This is the meaning of the statement. Before they call, I will answer. The answer exists before the prayer. The form exists before the desire. The harmony exists before the problem. It is already established in the invisible. And when the consciousness becomes quiet enough to recognize that truth, the outer expression begins to take shape. Let us understand that there is no cause and effect relationship between your realization and the appearing of harmony. It is not that the realization causes the harmony. It is that the realization reveals the harmony that already is. The invisible is forever complete. Our task is not to create, but to behold. When you permit the invisible to govern, it will appear outwardly in whatever way fulfills the need of the moment. It may come as a new insight, a sudden peace, a change in circumstance, or an unexpected resolution. But you will know that it is not the work of the human mind. It is the natural outpouring of grace, the invisible made visible. In this recognition, your life becomes a continual unfolding of spiritual harmony, not because you are directing your experience, but because you are allowing God to reveal itself in the only way God can as the allness of your being made manifest in daily living. As we bring this period of contemplation to a close, let us rest once more in the simplicity of what has been revealed. We have seen that there is no life to be fixed, no condition to be changed, no outer world to be reshaped. The entire burden of struggle has arisen from the belief that we, as persons, must somehow improve the handiwork of God. But as we go deeper into spiritual understanding, we discover that divine harmony is already established, already complete, already present as the invisible reality of our being. Whatever discord has appeared in our experience has been but a shadow of belief, not a power. Whatever fear has troubled us has had no law behind it, no substance sustaining it. And whatever healing we have sought has never been the changing of matter, but the awakening of consciousness to its oneness with God. When that oneness is felt, the need to struggle falls away, for we know that the Father within is the only activity of our life. Let us now leave behind the thought that we must strive to bring God into our affairs. God is already there. Let us set aside the impulse to reach outward for help. The kingdom is within. Let us release the burden of self-will, self-effort, and self-responsibility, and rest in the quiet confidence that divine intelligence is the very activity of our being. In this silence, you will find that there is nothing to ask for. There is nothing missing. There is nothing incomplete. You are standing in the presence of the one who has been your life from the beginning, the one who maintains and sustains all creation in perfect order. This presence does not begin its work when you call upon it. It is eternally functioning, eternally fulfilling itself as your life. And so, as we leave this time together, let the remembrance abide with you. There is nothing you must fix. There is nothing you must make happen. There is nothing you must change. All that is required is the quiet recognition of God as the only presence and the only power. Be still often. Let the mind rest. Let the heart open. Let the spirit within you bear witness to itself. And in that sacred stillness, you will find the assurance that all is well, not will be, but is. May this awareness go with you, not as a thought, but as the living presence that walks where you walk, breathes where you breathe, and lives as your very being. And now we rest in that peace, trusting the unseen activity of grace, knowing that its work is already complete.